Welcome, everyone, back to I Want to Teach English. I'm your host, Jose Torres, and today I'm honored to be joined by an educator who has spent nearly 3 decades helping students overcome some of the most persistent challenges in learning. My guest today is Ruth Rumack, founder and executive director of education at Ruth Rumack's Learning Space in Toronto, Canada. And since 1996, Ruth has built a nationally recognized educational center dedicated to supporting students with a wide range of learning needs, including dyslexia, ADHD, and a whole host of other challenges. What makes Ruth's work particularly noteworthy is her commitment to evidence-based instruction. Her organization utilizes direct instruction, methodologies of all sorts, and multisensory teaching, and all of her approaches are research-based. So please join me in welcoming Miss Ruth Rumack. Ruth, welcome to I Want to Teach English.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Ruth, I've been watching you from afar, and let me tell you, I'm very, very impressed with your work. Would you tell our audience a little bit about, just kind of sum up, I know I did a little bit in the introduction, but what's your real passion? Like, what's the center, if I could say, put it on a plate for us? What is it that you do?
I think literacy, watching kids succeed, and watching them change their lives because they learn how to read and they learn how to read proficiently.
Yeah, and reading is always big. It's always a big topic in education, as you know. People are always trying to find ways to do that. Not necessarily the razzle dazzle. It doesn't strike me that what you do is that. It's because it's research based. I think that's really what got my attention. Really, when I was looking at you. And you've been working a long time with struggling readers. So what are the most common misconceptions that parents and educators still have about why bright students struggle to learn to read? Why is that such a
Yeah,
big issue, Ruth?
I think one of the pieces is that reading difficulty is not the same as intelligence. And often, we look at our bright, articulate, wonderful children who are creative and who can problem solve in a moment's notice, but reading is really challenging for them. And we have to understand the way that the brain works and the way that evolution works, that reading is actually not a natural development as natural as speaking. Speaking, our oral traditions, that's been with us for, hundreds of thousands of years in our development. But the actual idea of writing a symbol down and being able to decode that, look at it, say what that symbol is, remember the sound that goes with that symbol, and then string it together with all the other symbols, that is particularly new in our evolutionary development, let's say. So it's much tougher. And I would definitely say that misconceptions, that exposure alone does not make a reader. Just because you read to your kid, which I'm a big proponent of, we should always be reading to our kids, but just because you're reading to them doesn't mean that they're going to, by osmosis, pick up the structure of language and how to actually decode. So I think the fact that, or the misconception that they'll catch on eventually, is a big one. And we really have to understand that most kids try hard. They do as much as they can do. And it's not just trying hard. They actually have to be given the skills and the steps and the scope and the sequence in order to put it together in the most efficient way for them.
Yeah, as someone who's been working with multilingual learners a long time.
Hold on, sorry. I turned off my phone before, so just give me a second. Everybody wants me. Nobody thinks that I'm doing this right now. Hold on. My apologies. All right, let's turn it off again. There we go. Disturb. And then I really hope that when my husband comes home, the dog doesn't go crazy barking. But all right, let's carry on.
So, Ruth, I can tell you just from working with multilingual learners, there's always this idea that, but they speak so well, and they attribute that to something that would carry over into reading. What I try to explain to people, and please feel free to chime in when I get to my point. We're talking about survival language, right? And you've heard that term, I'm sure, used it loosely, but really what we're talking about is like essentially survival, because the body develops these skills for it to
Mhm.
survive in the physical world.
Mhm.
Reading isn't necessarily a survival skill out there in the wild, if you will,
Right,
right?
right.
So we have to instill in our students that it is a survival skill, and that's how students will carry it up and say, okay, well, this is important for my survival down the road. But if
Mhm.
it doesn't register in their minds that it's something necessary for them to survive, I think that's where I think a lot of our hurdles really start. What do you
I
think?
think you're talking about, the mindset of reading, and
Hmm.
especially for students who find reading challenging, or an English language learner who is coming to it from a different perspective. And that I like that idea that it's survival versus non-survival, and when do we use it? I think that, you know, the mindset of, think about how many doors this is going to open for you. Think about how many opportunities it's going to open for you. And I don't really even mean for the future. I'll give you an example. I had a student that I was working with who had severe dyslexia. And he came to me when he was probably 9, and he was reading at a kindergarten level. And even at a kindergarten level, it was really challenging for him. And, but he loved Pokemon. And
Mm,
he wanted so badly to be able to read those Pokemon cards that that was his motivation. That
mm.
became his survival. And when he was able to finally not have dad read them or his younger brother read them to him, but he could pick them up and read them himself, that was the thing that I think became the real turning point for him. Was he saw value in what he was doing, and he saw how it gave him independence, and that independence gave him confidence, and that confidence just became a positive loop. So I think that that relates to this idea of survival. We're not using reading to fight off a woolly mammoth, but we certainly are using it to advance ourselves and to give ourselves freedom.
Right. And just to be clear, like a lot of the work that you do is very specialty work in working with students who have specific challenges like dyslexia or ADHD or talk about some of the other challenges that are not so familiar to people.
Well, it's usually I'd say a mixed bag, because
Mm,
when somebody presents with one thing, they often present with something else. So you may have the combination of ADHD and neurodiversity. So somebody who's on the autism spectrum, or we might be working with students who have an audio processing issue, which is something that a lot of people don't understand. It's not a hearing issue; they hear just fine. It's the ability to understand and perceive the information that they get through their ears. And in fact, somebody with an audio processing issue, for example, may hear better, understand better from one side than they do from the other. I had a
mm.
student once who had 95% ability from one side and only 5% from the other, even though she could hear the exact same words from both. It just depended on which side you were talking to her through, and it would help her understand better to be on one side or the other. So
Wow.
lots of different issues that we see. I think executive functions, when
Mm,
we think about how a student, often executive functions get lumped in with being organized. But in fact, it's not just organizing your stuff, it's also organizing your thoughts orally, so in storytelling and in recounting something, but also organizing your thoughts in a written form. Um, and all the different variations and combinations. I've worked with students who have dyspraxia. I've worked with students who have oh my goodness, the list goes on. Students who had strokes early on in their lives. It's just
yeah.
that's been the most, actually one of the most interesting things is when I get a new student diving deep into where they're coming from, what are their strengths and what are their challenges.
Ruth, in recent years, like the science of reading has become a major topic in education, and into something that I spoke at a conference last year about it, and it really garnered a lot of attention and got people talking. But from your perspective, tell me, what have schools gotten right? Because I imagine that you've been able to look at different school districts and that sort of thing. What have they gotten right, and where do you think many schools are still falling short in the science of reading aspect?
Well, first of all, let me say hallelujah. I am so glad that people are talking about it,
Yes, they
because,
are.
you
Very much
know,
so.
30 years in this business, and in this sort of intersection of education and different philosophies and different pedagogies. When I started my practice, I was coming from coming out of school, and from school I was taught the whole language method, and memorizing and guessing and all sorts of structures that when I started actually working with students, particularly students who had difficult and challenging needs,
Mhm.
I I couldn't make any progress. I wasn't making progress. So the further I went into the research, and I was going back 20 and 30 years from that point, 30 years ago, to research, and looking at the way that I learned to read, which was a phonics-based system, I was starting to, put together programs that were much more effective. And, it was a really uphill battle. It was like swimming upstream, trying to
Mm.
talk to a classroom teacher when I was doing the one-on-one work and saying, look, we're working on phonics, we're working on sounds, we're working on this scope and sequence that's going to build mastery from one step to the next. And they kind of looked at me like, oh, okay, go ahead. Like they
Yeah.
didn't know what I was talking about. Parents didn't know what I was talking about. So at this point, I'm so glad that I can have a conversation where I don't sound or feel like an alien, and I have more people who are able to give back that same kind of, let's say, attention in the right way. So, what are schools getting right? I think that the fact that we have more awareness about evidence-based reading instruction is wonderful. That there are teachers who are embracing it, they're really diving deep into the research, they're using it in their classrooms, and sometimes they're doing it with the um, blessing of the school. The whole school is involved. Sometimes it's
Mm.
only one teacher in the school, but good for them, for doing it. I would say the increase in phonics and on decoding is a plus, and the fact that we have better screening and identification are all pluses.
You are talking my language now. As soon as you had me at phonics. Now, you talk a little bit about your work with the Yak Pack comics and the phonics series. Talk about that.
I would love to. All right, let me show you. Here's my
Mm.
baby. Well, one of my
Mm.
babies. But this is the Yak Pack
The Yak
phonics and
Pack.
comics. The Yak Pack. The Yak Pack. This guy is Zach the Yak, and he lives in a forest with all of his friends. And the idea behind the Yak Pack was we wanted to create a resource for our striving readers that was not babyish, that didn't
Mm.
look like a stick figure drawing or that something you would use in kindergarten, because so many of my students were, 9, 10, and older in
Yeah.
and coming to reading at that age. So what's better than a comic? What's better than a graphic novel? And
Yeah.
we created these comics and phonics where we start with a very specific scope and sequence. So we're starting with short vowels. Every book has a different skill. We introduce the sound with an anchor chart, and then we use the words in games and activities. We introduce the high frequency words, and then we go ahead and we wrote fantastic, exciting comics, and we had them illustrated by an animator, and no AI here. There, it's all hand drawn. It's
All hand
all
done.
all
It's all
real
human
person
created.
in real life, IRL.
Yeah.
And then we created 5 books in the phonics series that go through the scope and sequence that I feel to be the most effective, which is starting with short vowels, moving on. We're going through the digraphs, the blends, the bossy E, the AR or the controlled R words. And then the companion to that, which we use at the same time, is the comics and high frequency words. And in this type of book, we start with just 2 high frequency words at a time, and we use
Mhm.
pictures for the rest. And you can see that as you move through the series, you end up learning more words and you build your repertoire as you go along. So we created them for our students, but really what we found is that the people are loving them. There are 70,000 copies in homes and schools across the nation. And what is beautiful is the feedback we get, that especially for those readers who were having difficulty, who didn't have the confidence or weren't finding success, because we are very measured in the text. It's truly
Yeah.
decodable. There are no words that you have not seen before. The success is built in, and they just want to read another story and another story and another story. And I was talking with a parent yesterday who said, I couldn't get my kid to go to sleep because they wouldn't put the book down. So that to me is huge
That's
success
a
for
good problem to have, by the way.
exactly. That's what I said. I said, let them stay up as long as they want.
So where
So,
can
so
people find the Yak Pack comics? Where can they get them? Do you have a website?
We have a website. You can find them at rumackresources.com, but they're actually available on Amazon. So you just have to type in the Yak Pack, YAKPACK, and they'll come up.
Hi, if you're enjoying this conversation, I'd like to share a resource with you that I developed after being in education for 25 years and nearly 2 decades working with English learners. My textbook, I Want to Learn English, is specifically designed for beginner English learners. It combines phonics, vocabulary development, speaking, reading, and writing into a structured curriculum that helps students build confidence while developing real-world English skills. One of the challenges we face as teachers is finding materials that are rigorous enough to promote growth, but accessible enough that students don't become overwhelmed. That's exactly what I set out to do when I created I Want to Learn English. The lessons are practical, easy to follow, and designed for adolescent and adult newcomers and multilingual learners who are just beginning their English learning journey. This textbook is currently being used by teachers, tutors, community centers, refugee programs, and K-12 classrooms here in America and internationally. To learn more, go to iwtle.com. You can preview the materials, you can learn more about the curriculum, and see how it might fit your program. There's also lots of articles and other resources there, so make sure you go to iwtle.com. You can also message me directly, info@iwtle.com. Now, let's get back to the conversation.
And we find that they're actually effective for early readers, just as effective for early readers, because we are starting from scratch right at the beginning with short vowel sounds. So they're really appropriate for anyone from age 3 all the way through to 10, 11, even 12. Yeah. And they are exciting, and the characters are fun, and there's not one stick of babyish in it. And we really try and preserve our learners' dignity, which is what's really important.
You and I are on the absolute same page, Ruth. If you haven't read my research paper, you really should, because of the way you were speaking of the sequence, it's exactly the way I mapped it out in my research paper. I'll send you a link later, and I'll put in the link in this description below, as well as the links to Ruth's website, so you can find her materials there. So that's a wonderful thing to share. Now, piggybacking off of that, if you will, you often talk about helping students who need information presented differently, much like how you present it with this comic book. What are some signs that a child is not receiving instruction in a way that matches how they learn? Like, what are some of the telltale signs from your experience?
I think they're actually quite physical, in that you'll often see something physical happen. Their face will change. They'll start to withdraw. I mean, I've seen kids roll on the ground, laughing and or crying, based on their avoidance of not wanting to look at the letters on the page. That's usually in the first few lessons when we get to know a student. But once we start to help them build that confidence and build that success, that melts away, and the behavior changes almost overnight, which is quite beautiful. So you'll see it in frustration, you'll see it in avoidance, you'll see it in shutdown. And shutdown looks different for some kids. Some kids will physically shut down and put their head on the desk, and some students will just, close up, and it's difficult to get them back. I think another way that you might see that the instruction doesn't match the child is the inconsistent performance. So they may be able to get it one day, but they can't recall it because it hasn't stuck. It hasn't been presented in a way that really stays with them. There's nothing that they have that they can hold on to in order to recall that information the next time that they see the same skill, or the skill is put into action. So if you see a student who understands it one day but loses it the next, then we know that we either haven't had enough practice with that skill, there isn't enough mastery, or it hasn't been presented in a way that it makes sense to them. So my way of coming at it is always curiosity. So what haven't we discovered yet about how this child learns best? And the more we ask that question, the deeper we get.
Let me ask you something, Ruth, because when you were talking, it triggered something in me, because I think a lot of times classroom teachers, we work with students who may not be identified as special education, but what you're describing sometimes is exactly the kind of behavior and kind of reactions that students that have special education, especially like an IEP, right?
Yeah.
And I always tell teachers, look, if you have students who are, have a an IEP or they have special education, and you have resource teachers, or not resources, but you have like specialists in your building, sped teachers or interventionists with interventional teachers, like reading specialists and that sort of thing. That support system is very crucial, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. I mean, you need to gather your village, right? You
Yeah.
have to bring in as many people as you can support that child from various angles. It's not just a one little lens that you have to look. It's not like a pinhole camera.
Right.
We have to look at the whole child, and we have to look at not just what's happening in the classroom, but what's happening at home. What's happening on the playground? What's happening, what is the family dynamic?
Yeah.
What is the community dynamic even?
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
if we can pull back a little bit and try and have compassion for where that student is at that exact moment, it goes a long way to building a rapport with your students and then being able to understand them. I mean, the beauty of the work I do is mostly one-on-one, and I get to know my students so well, and I can tell the second that they walk in that door if it's been a good day or if it's been a bad day. And because of that, I can be flexible. I can change things around. I can do an activity I know that they feel good with first, and then we can work on the hard stuff second. But
Yeah.
having access to other colleagues and professionals with different lenses, I think, wow, what a gift. If you have that, use it.
Of course. And and let me tell you, it's one of those things. Teachers sometimes they just get overwhelmed and
Yeah.
they start losing a little bit of their footing. So we have to kind of recenter ourselves and that sort of thing. And a lot of that stems from like pressure, the pressure that covers certain aspects of the curriculum. They have
Mhm.
to be paced a certain way. And yeah, I think some students require a little bit more TLC. They require a little bit more one-on-one. And let's face it, teachers sometimes they're in a class, and if they don't have a co-teaching situation, they're managing 25, 30 kids, and
Yes.
the younger they are in age, the more challenging that is, and that's relative. But how do we balance those demands of pacing guides, for example, with the reality that some students just need explicit systemic instruction and foundational skills like the ones you've outlined earlier? Like,
Yeah.
this is hard to do when you have to deal with the demands of the curriculum, wouldn't you say?
When you got 30 kids in your class and, probably 6 to 8 of them have IEPs, and you may have some other neurodivergence going on in your classroom as well, it's not easy. Hats off to those classroom teachers to go in every single day. I don't take that task lightly. I think,
Yeah.
when you're talking about curriculum pacing versus foundational skills, where do you balance? How do you balance it? My go-to is teach the child before the curriculum. So we do need to find moments to work with those students to give them those foundational skills to close those gaps, because we know from lots of research and lots of case studies that the small investments in foundations really save years of struggle later on. And if we can, I like to think about building a house. If we're building a house and that foundation isn't strong, it doesn't matter how many floors you add above, it's not going to make the structure stronger. So I think if we can slow the pace down to the needs of those children, if we want to group them in small groups, because at least it's better than pushing straight ahead, with the whole class. If we can't give them the one-on-one time, then find a way to, either pull that other person in or get some extra support so that we can give those kids those small steps that they need in order to make the larger leaps later on. I think always
Yeah.
look to the kid.
Absolutely. And something, all of these things that we're talking about, these small groups, one-on-ones if possible. I mean, those are a luxury in a
I
lot of
know.
schools. Let's be
I know.
honest. But the reading instruction in itself has become a kind of a political battleground, if you will,
Mhm.
because there's the people that want to say, well, we need to invest more, and then you have the people say, well, we've already invested a lot and
Yeah.
we're not happy with the results. So how can educators stay focused on the evidence and the student outcomes, and when there's so many competing philosophies that are fighting for their attention, because that well has dried up, at least in the United States it's been drying up, and everybody still has the same programs and the same demands, and now that competition for that funding has intensified.
I say keep the focus on the students. If I
Yeah.
could say anything to the higher ups, it's like go into your classrooms, go and take a look, go and see what's working and what's not working. Look at the
Right.
material that's actually on your shelf,
Hmm.
because I think part of some of this issue stems from, we've done a good job of learning about science of reading,
Hmm.
but where are we in the implementation of science of reading? And how good is the training that those teachers are getting? Are they getting a one-day workshop and then they're supposed to take all of this new information
They're
and implement it?
experts.
But yeah, but they also don't have the resources. They don't have the texts that will actually support
Yeah.
the work that they
Yeah.
are trying to do. So if you teach your kids a new phonics skill, and then you say, okay, now we're going to practice this phonics skill, but I'm giving you a reader, a leveled reader that has 5 different phonics, not even phonics skills, just 5 different reading skills in it. And then we're encouraging them to guess and to memorize. Then how is that actually helping what we're trying to accomplish in the first place? So how do we keep things not political? I think one is asking your administration um, to come at it with like a full spectrum look. Are
Yeah.
we do we Yes, we're doing this, we're implementing this kind of programming, but do we have the support material that actually follows through with that, so that we're not competing with what we're asking kids to do? I think we have to think on evidence over ideology. What is actually working in your classroom, and is this helping children become better readers or not? And we have to look at outcomes. The outcomes matter much more than the philosophy, and the focus should always be on the student outcomes and not on the educational ideology.
Sure, and I always tell my colleagues, look, what you can control is within these four walls that you're in, and
Yep.
that's what you focus on. Now, I realize that there are disagreements with materials sometimes, and there's a disagreement with the pacing, and that could be contentious, and I get that because at the end of the day, teachers want to do what's right for their students, and a lot
Hmm.
of times they're faced with some difficult decisions to make, and I get that. But whatever you can control, like what's in front of you is what you can control, and if you have to follow a certain curriculum, you have to stay on a certain pace,
Yep.
then you do the best you can within those, and you have guide rails for a reason, the guardrails for a reason. So just work with what you have, and lean on your support system to kind of fill in the gaps as much as possible. That's what I
Yeah.
tell them.
Yeah. And I think, looking at how other teachers have done it, maybe not in your own school, but with a different administration, because sometimes it's incremental, right? Like you don't have to rip the band-aid off and just suddenly be in shock because now you're in a completely different system. I think
Right.
we can look at, okay, well, what can I bring into my classroom that will move the needle just a little bit, right? We're talking about incremental steps. So, for example, if you have an opportunity to buy materials for your reading corner that align with what you're teaching, on the phonics and decoding side, and we know that you can use those readers in a small group setting or at a reading center or as a take-home bag, those are the little things that you can do that will, again, help build your foundation as an educator, to keep you moving forward and being able to, let's say, give your students as much as you can, even
Yeah,
in a limited way.
of course. And I think for those teachers out there watching that are primarily working with multilingual learners, I mean, this is a given, right? So, and you work a lot with multilingual learners, I would imagine. So, what
Yep.
lessons from reading intervention for native English speakers do you believe transfer well to English learners? Like, and where do the educators need to be more cautious, really? Because you
Yeah.
can't really. I mean, you could, but there are some cautions you need to take, right?
There are. I think that some of the transferable skills would be that explicit instruction.
Hmm.
Explicit instruction works. It just works, right? Like when I have to learn something new, it's much easier for me if somebody stands over me and takes me through step by step in a logical sequence way than if I just have to, if I'm, listening to in a big group and trying to kind of piece together all the things on my own. So explicit instruction we know works. Decoding matters. I mean, that is for all readers, whether it's your
Hmm.
first language or your second language or your third or your fourth language. And in English, we need to learn how to decode. We need to learn how to take that symbol, remember what it says, and then being able to squeeze it together with the other symbols and what they say, break them apart so that we can spell them and then write them, and that whole sequence moving in tandem at the same time. I think vocabulary matters. That's a very easy transferable skill. A lot of students in a English language learning situation are, they're just getting used to the vocabulary. So what you're reading and the comprehension also depends on vocabulary, as well as, most importantly, I think, is confidence and feeling successful, and knowing that it's okay to make a mistake. You're not going to be perfect on your first try or your second or your third, but we're going to keep practicing it because we're building that confidence. So those are the transferable skills in any kind of reading situation. I think the cautions would be remembering that not every reading challenge is a decoding issue. Sometimes we have to pull back from, a student may have really good recall of the sound and the symbol correspondence, but they don't actually know what they're saying. It's just a bunch of sounds strung together. They don't have the vocabulary yet, so that's an issue. It could be that language proficiency. And we always have to protect a student's dignity. And we always have to make them feel welcome in that new environment, and make them feel safe enough to take the risk to try. And learning, I always say, learning takes enormous risk. And if you don't feel safe in your environment, there's no way you can take a risk, and there's no way that learning can happen. So that's, that your home language is an asset. It gives you understanding from one place that can be transferable, but we have to make sure that that learning environment is a safe learning environment.
I'll share a real quick story, really trying to go on. It's a nice little piece that you just said. And I was remembering this student, this little girl, and we were going over a lot of different, vocabulary and pronunciation, that sort of thing. And she was like really quiet, and she didn't want to say anything, and she didn't want to respond. She didn't want to write anything. She didn't want to do anything. And I was like, I finally I pulled her to the side. I'm like, listen, what's going on? Is there like, are you sad? Is there something going on at home that you feel comfortable talking about? What's going on? And she's like, I don't want to make a mistake. She said, and I feel bad if I make a mistake. And I'm like,
Right.
listen, that's the point, is to make mistakes. I said, the whole point of learning is to make, that's how you learn, because when you make a mistake, you realize, okay, next time I won't do that. Or now I realize the next time I have to write this word that, the E comes before the I on this one, or whatever. This is how you learn. And then I think I've had that conversation more than once. And then she started participating more in class. So kind of what you were talking about, doing that one-on-one is so crucial.
I think about, the learning that we do at our learning center and at Ruth Rumack Learning Space. And you will not see students sitting at desks writing paper pencil activities. You will see kids bouncing up and down the halls on giant bouncy balls. You'll see them doing relay races with mini hockey nets and hockey sticks. You'll see them throwing balls. You'll see them throwing magnetic darts. You'll see them working with letters on a tile board. We keep things very, very kinesthetic, and it's always moving, and it's that mind-body connection, and it's fun. And I think that's one of the things that is a really easy thing to transfer from, an English reading program for first language learners to an English language learner situation, is keep it fun, keep it light, keep it enjoyable, make it game-based, make it activity-based. All those same things, you can get through the same skills with that you can on a paper and pencil worksheet, that you can, in a physical or more kinesthetic way.
Sure. And I always say, if it's appropriate enough, and if you can work it in there to have these type of game-like scenarios during instruction, by all means, go for it. But sometimes that's challenging in itself, right? Because sometimes the content lends itself to games sometimes.
True. One of the things, I don't know if you do this with your students, but readers theater, that what we've taken our books and we've created readers theater scripts from them. So we'll take the dialogue and we'll break it up and we'll give different students different parts. So somebody's going to be Zach the Yak, somebody's going to be Nat the Rat, somebody's going to be Pim the Pig, all the different characters. And then we read together. So we've read it once for understanding and practice, and then we'll practice a few times. So not only are they getting a little performance, they get to do a little performance, which is great for some students who really love to shine in that way. But it's also great for mastery because they have to practice it a few times if they're going to give their little mini scene performance. So there are little things that you can work in that will practice those foundational skills that aren't necessarily traditional, but still make it fun and make it engaging.
Absolutely. And that's gold, what you just mentioned. So Ruth, let me ask you, over the course of your career, what has been the most surprising thing that you've learned about how children develop confidence as readers? Because you mentioned that throughout this conversation about confidence and confidence building. But how do we develop that in a reader?
My philosophy at this point, what I've learned is that most people think, sort of common wisdom, that that success follows confidence, that first you're confident and then you find the success. But I actually think it's the opposite, that I feel that if you can give a child success, early stages of success, really simple levels of success, and they feel good about it, then their confidence is going to grow. And then they get a little more confident and they find more success and their confidence grows even further. And so we want to, in some ways, set the bar low at the beginning, make it easy to do well. And then you'll see that the whole body changes. Their eyes light up. Their smiles are bigger. They're like, they're walking a little taller and a little prouder. So for me, that if you think about a student who comes in and says, for me, they would say at the beginning, reading is hard. And yeah, it's true. Learning to read is hard. But if they don't find success early, then reading is hard becomes, I'm not a good reader. I'll never be a good reader. I must be dumb. I'm not like the other kids. Like it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. And then the attitude and that mindset of negativity really starts to take over. And that's the thing that I worry about the most, which is when I see students, when they've come to me, they've probably spent years and years feeling that they weren't capable of reading and that it's never going to happen for them. So for me, success has to come first and then confidence grows. Another thing I think that we want to be careful. We want to protect those identities. We don't want students to leave our classrooms feeling like failures. We want them to feel like winners, and that real success, that authentic success at the beginning, I think changes that self-belief. And that's really why I created the Yak Pack in the first place, which was to create that scenario so that what I was teaching in the foundation skills part was then backed up in a practice and mastery way, and that they're engaging, they're all decodable, it's easy success. And that's where we get the feedback, which is, that child that's staying up all night to read our Yak Pack comics because they are feeling successful after each story, because we've broken it down into small enough pieces that they're able to gain that skill, master that skill, and then use it for the next piece. One step, scaffolded one step at a time. Dignity preserving, most important.
So we are cultivating confidence.
Yes.
That would be a good way of putting it, phrasing it.
I would say confidence is the result of success, not the prerequisite for it.
Beautiful. That's beautiful, actually. All right, Ruth, last question. If we can just sum this up, like looking ahead in the next 10 years, like what gives you hope about literacy education and what concerns you the most?
Okay. I think science of reading awareness, the fact that we've got so many people talking about it gives me tremendous hope. We have better identification. We've got better research going on. So the more we're talking about it, the more we're learning about it, which is really excellent. And more people are learning at the same time, more informed teachers and parents. And I think the fact that these evidence-based practices are spreading because they are effective. So, if you've got somebody in the classroom 2 doors down from you who's doing something a little different, but somehow her kids are, reading at a faster pace than another classroom on the other side, we're kind of looking over the fence going, "Oh, well, what are you doing over
What are
there?"
they
So
doing over there?
exactly, what's going on? So I think that gives me hope. Some of my concerns, there are still students who are slipping through the cracks, right?
Yeah.
Our funding is still not at the level that it should be. There's too much late intervention. We should be doing way more early intervention. And as I mentioned before, that emotional consequences of failure and repeated
Mhm.
failure too, and the fact that it's going to impact on an individual's identity. I mean, I cannot tell you how many parents will come to me bringing their kids with similar issues that they themselves had and take me aside privately and say, "I wish that I could have had the instruction that my kids are getting from you now, because my life would have been so different." So
Wow.
if we can do that, that could change the world, actually. If we can reach more kids earlier and get them reading and feeling confident, then we can actually change the world around us. And I think literacy is about more than just reading. It's about access, it's about opportunity, and it's about building independence.
Wonderful. Ruth Rumack, everyone. Ruth Rumack. Rumack, right?
That's it.
Ladies and gentlemen, please do us all a favor and go to the description of this video and look at the links there. Find Ruth's website, get a copy of her book. It's a series, though, right, Ruth?
It is.
The
We've
Yak
got,
Pack?
yeah, 5 red books and 5 blue books, and together they make a 10-book system where you can take your kids from just knowing, if they know the sounds of the most of the consonants, we can take them all the way through to the end of grade 2 reading level. And it's perfect for the summer, actually.
Do you have a Facebook page for this?
I have an Instagram page, and
Instagram?
the Instagram is the Yak Pack Comics, and you can find me there. And it's got all kinds of information and lots of good tips and tricks too.
Excellent. And that also will be in the description. So, Ruth, thank you so much for being a part of the I Want to Teach English series channel. I've
Thank
had some
you.
pretty great guests on this show, and people like you are just the top quality that's out there, and I'm really grateful. And everyone who's watching this video should really check out her work. And if you're on LinkedIn, look her up. Thank you again, Miss Ruth.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity.